Hello friends, this would be my first YouTube channel, so I hope you enjoy the story I'm going to unpack for you. A few things about myself. I can tell you that I studied ministry. I've been a hospital chaplain. Sometimes I'll preach at church. Sometimes I'm asked to have the service when someone leaves this world and goes to their rest. And I do that too because sometimes people just need a source of hope and encouragement. And here we have a visitor coming through the covered bridge. We're in the state of Virginia, little town Quicksburg in Shenandoah County. It's one of the only remaining covered bridges in the state of Virginia. And cars still come through there. It's a full working bridge, even though people tried to burn it down in 1976. It's been completely rebuilt. I raised my 4 kids in this area. At least this was part of my home at that point. And of my 4 kids, I have photos of them seated inside this bridge. So this bridge has always been special in my life for many reasons. And it's a wonderful place to visit. So here I am, out here telling my story, because I wanted to just share something on a YouTube channel that would give people a sense of what life is like. We all have different lives. We all go through different things. There's another car coming up the road here. I'm seeing down a whole line of trees. It's a beautiful view. And so having been a chaplain, I was visiting that day particular patients. And there was a particular patient, I stopped by the nurse's station. He knew that he was terminal. So I went to the nurse's station and the nurse went over with me how he was doing and what's been any update for him. His family was going to come by that day and the doctor was going to confirm with them. They knew he was sick, but they were going to confirm that day that he was indeed terminal. So when I walked in the room and I said, Mr. So-and-so came by to pay you a visit. He said, oh, you're the chaplain. I said, yeah. He said, did you bring God with you? I said, well, I asked him to come with me. And he said to me, well, he said, God has forgotten me. So I want you to go out the same door you just came in and take God with you. I turned and I apologized to him and I said, I didn't come on a good day, I'm sorry. And I turned and I walked out of the door and I took God with me. I got out of his view and I walked over to the hall so he couldn't see me. I think I leaned back on the wall and I said a prayer. I said, Lord, I'm not sure how I'm going to manage this today, but I need to come back tomorrow and visit so-and-so. And so I finished my visits that day. I checked out my clock in the chaplain's office and I went back home. I was actually in college living in the boys' dorm. So I had gone home that night and I called my father. He's a World War II veteran, had battlefield promotions because he had promotions while in the battlefield for bravery in battle. He saved lives. He also had some people lose their life while they were in his arms. And I called Dad and told him what had happened that day and how it had worked out. So I don't remember telling you, or I can't tell you all of what he said to me. I can tell you that what he said was encouraging enough that I wanted to share it with them. So when I did that, I got to the hospital early the next morning, 30 minutes. Now we got a little bit of an RV. I guess he's going to go through the covered bridge. Let's see how he does. There he goes. I think he's going to make it just fine. And that's sort of a classic treat for yourself. You got these old RVs here in a beautiful part of the state of Virginia going through the covered bridge, and they've received a blessing just by doing that. The interior of this bridge is really marvelously constructed, and it's really an amazing craft to put together a covered wooden bridge. The bridge was nearly burnt down in 1976, but it was rebuilt, and it's called the Means Covered Bridge. MEAMS covered bridge. You can look it up. One of the only few remaining working in the state of Virginia. So here I am. The next day I get to the hospital. I got there early, so I went to the gift shop. And I went down there and I think I bought the current edition of USA Today. I bought a chocolate bar, like Hershey's chocolate bar, and I put it in my coat or shirt pocket, and I bought a pack of gum. I remember going up to the room of this patient 30 minutes early. I took off my tie, I took off my chaplain name tag, and I went up to the room. I just peeked my head through the door briefly and I saw, let's just call him George. I saw George lying in bed and I said, George, I brought you a newspaper, and I untucked the paper and I handed it to him. And he said, thank you. I didn't introduce myself as chaplain to anybody. I just said, George, I'm here to bring you a paper, and he was glad I did. So I handed that to him and I said, oh, by the way, if you have a sweet tooth, and I gave him a chocolate Hershey bar. And when I got done with that, I said, George, if you can't get to the restroom, but you want to kind of freshen your breath and you can't brush your teeth, here's a pack of gum. Just freshen your breath a little bit with a pack of gum. So he's got a newspaper, he's got a chocolate bar, and he's got a pack of gum. And he's still not really sure who I am. I don't think he remembered the visit the day before. My tie was off, my tag was off. And so here's what happened. I said, George, enjoy the paper. I said, I've got some people I'm going to visit, but I'll be back in about an hour. And while I'm out there visiting and I come back, I'm going to give you one homework assignment. He said, what's that? I said, well, I want you to find me one piece of good news in that newspaper. He said, okay, fair enough. So I went and I visited other patients. Hour and a half goes by. And I go back to his room for George. I walked inside the room and went over to his bedside. He wasn't resting, he was just kind of comfortable. And he pulls the paper right out. He said, here, I got a good news story. I forget what it was, but he shared something with me that was worthwhile. So I thanked him for doing that. And I gave him something to focus on. So as we talked a little bit, I came over to his bedside. I just grasped his hand with mine. And I said, George, how'd you sleep last night? He said, I didn't sleep at all. I said, were you in a lot of pain? He said, no, it wasn't pain. He said, I couldn't stop thinking about my wife, my children, my grandchildren. I have some coworkers that have paid a few visits, but I'm in pretty rough shape. But that's why I couldn't sleep. My mind was so busy thinking about other people and myself. I pulled up a chair, sat down in the chair, and I released his hand. And I said, tell me about last night. And I sat in that chair for about 15 minutes. You have a limited scope of time when you're visiting people. And sometimes you're there for that reason. You're visiting them. And the one thing you learn to do when you're beside the bed of someone's terminal and they're special in your life, you want to be their source of strength. You pull up a chair, you sit down, and you know what you say to them? The big goose egg. You say nothing. I sat for 15 minutes, didn't say a single word, but he got to pour out his heart. And by doing that, he got to unpack. He got to unpack things that were in his life and why he didn't sleep last night. And after 15 minutes, I stood up. I said, George, thank you for sharing that with me. And I said, before I leave, can I just have a prayer with you and ask God to help you get a good night's sleep tonight? He said, yeah, I'd like that. So I clasped his hand in mine. I had a brief prayer. We asked the good Lord just to put his arms around George and give him the ability to sleep better than he did the night before. And for the next 2 weeks, I visited George. I come in each day. Some days I'd have a newspaper. Some days I'd have a pack of gum. But what I learned in that visit with George was there's a precious lesson in life. And I sort of developed my own class, and I'm still in the same class from that visit. And the class is called The Art of Listening. You know, when you're with someone who's in rough shape or terminal or anything close to those paths of life, you learn that the art of listening is really what they need the most. They don't need to hear your words. They need to have somebody who will listen to what's going on in their heart and unwinding in their mind so that they can unpack. and dissipate some of the pressures that they're under. So for now, I hope that you enjoyed that brief story. And I'll also tell you one more brief introduction, because I'll share many of these coming up. But I remember one day as I began to drive Uber in 2016, over 10 years ago. I've been driving Uber and I've had part-time delivery of people all over the Washington, D.C. area. But one day I drove a lady from Northern Virginia, perhaps a town called Tyson's Corner, and I drove her into Washington, D.C. And as we got close to dropping her off, she was going down the road where there's a lot of embassies. And as we had our 30-minute drive from Northern Virginia into Washington, by the time she got out of the car, she simply said to me, "Mark, I'm going to call you the Rolling Chaplain." That's exactly what she told me. So think of me as a Rolling Chaplain. And as a Rolling Chaplain, I've got amazing stories that have unfolded in my life just for driving people in my car. I could share a couple other things before I finish this particular video, and that is this, that I've often had people in my car. I pick them up at the universities. It may be a boyfriend, girlfriend, could be a husband and wife. It could be a group of young people, 3, 4. And they'll often ask, "Sir, should I drive Uber?" And what I tell them, I tell every one of them the same thing. I said, well, if money is your only metric, don't drive Uber. There's not enough juice in that orange. But if you love people, you should drive, because you're going to meet people and you're going to have what a doctor calls a patient encounter. As an Uber driver for over a decade, I call them people encounters. And when I can have encounters with people, and the people can tell me what's going on in their world or their life for the next 15, 20 minutes, some of them are an hour. If I know I have an hour, we're going to engage in a conversation. Because once they're in my car, we're going to talk about the good Lord. We're going to talk about words of encouragement in their lives. But I'll show some more of those on another day. But today I wanted to introduce to you my patient named George. That was years ago. He did die about a month later. His family asked me to do his service. And so we had his life celebration service. And I was able to get to know George and able to speak at his service. So for me, that's a blessing to be asked to be the source of strength in someone's life. None of us have all the answers, but I was there perhaps when he needed someone the most to do just that. One more car coming, we'll see what comes through, and then I'll say enough for now. I don't want to overload you guys, but I'm glad you listened. So, sounds like a truck right behind me, and the truck is coming through the Means covered bridge. So it ought to be an interesting trip for him, and one you'll never forget. It's a good way to end the video. Wasn't that special? So I'll say goodbye for now. Great to meet you, and we'll talk again. God bless you and change the world. There is one more car coming. Let's see who it is.